OurYoungAddicts.com. When you get there, there's a blog. It's updated at least once a week, sometimes more often. We do guest blogs. I write blogs. It's still very much real time. I have resources on there for parents and professionals. When I find something good, I put it on there. How to talk to your kids about this, what to do if, numbers you can call, etc. So I try to share as much good information because it's a maze. And sometimes you don't find very good information. So when I find something good, I share it.
It's time for the Share Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host, O.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of TSP, the Share Podcast. And today we have Rose McKinney, the Midwestern Mama, joining us. She is the founder of Our Young Addicts. She started this project when her own son became addicted to drugs and alcohol himself. In order to cope and deal and learn about what was going on with her son, Rose started a community of parents and professionals who share experiences, resources, and more importantly, hope to other parents who are also battling with drug abuse in their home. Rose has an amazing story, and she's got a lot of great resources to help parents better understand what their child is going through, and more importantly, the coping skills, tools, and resources necessary to help your child find recovery. I'm excited that Rose is on the show because I've had a lot of parents reach out to me looking for answers about how to best help their child. So we're going to jump into Rose's story, but first, a little Share Podcast news. Okay, guys, another quick reminder that on May 6th, 7th, and 8th of this year, 2016, in Manuel Antonio, Costa Rica, is the International AA Convention here in Costa Rica. So what I've done is on the homepage of the Share Podcast, I have put a banner. Just click on that banner. It sends you right to the page where you can get all the information about the convention, how to register, and about hotel accommodations. I have personally attended this convention about 5 times. I love it. The weather is fantastic, and it's always a good time. So if you have the resources and the time, I'd love to meet you in person. If you can't make it out to Costa Rica, but you live somewhere near Seattle, I will be at the Seattle International Narcotics Anonymous Convention this year, July 29th, 30th, and 31st, 2016. It will be held at the Seattle Airport Marriott, and I will be the main speaker on Friday night opening up the convention. If you go to the Share Podcast website, on the right-hand side of the website, you'll see a banner. It's a blue banner that says SINAC 2016. Click on that banner. It'll send you to the page where you have information about room rates, about registering for the convention. Everything you need to know about attending the convention is right on that website. So again, I would love to meet you guys in person. If you can make it out there, would love to see you. And as always, a big thank you to all of our listeners who sent in their generous donations. The most recent donations were from Katie, Susie, Brian, Lewis, Deborah, and Marla. Again, the entire amount of your donation goes towards maintaining and growing the show. If you would like to make a donation, just go to the website. On the right-hand side of the page, you'll see a big yellow button, and it says Donate via PayPal. Click on that button. It'll take you right to the donate page. And if you're going to buy something on Amazon anyway, then you might as well go to the Share Podcast, click on the banner that says Amazon, and then make your purchase after you've clicked on that banner. What that will do is anything you purchase on Amazon will kick back a little commission to the Share Podcast. It's not going to cost you a penny more, and it's going to absolutely help support and grow the show. And if you haven't done so yet, don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio. It's the best way to show your support, and it's the best way for us to rank higher on these search engines and help more people easily find the Share Podcast. And speaking of 5-star rating and reviews, it's time to read a few of the ratings and reviews that were posted on iTunes. The first one is from Greek Fire. Amazing. Wow, just wow. I listened to Raquel's story of addiction and I was left in such a state of awe that I want to listen to every other episode. Her story is so inspirational and I am left with so much respect for her. I wish I could tell her face to face. I haven't struggled with addiction myself, but there is family history of it, so I'm always aware about my own addictive behavior and try to live in that conscious state. It's encouraging to hear these stories of falling to addiction and pulling out of it. I love this, and I am recommending this podcast to everyone. Awesome. Thank you so much, Greek Fire, for that wonderful review. And one of the reasons why I posted this one is because it seems as though Greek Fire is not even an addict, but is the family member of an addict, who is also benefiting from the therapeutic value of listening to others share their compelling stories. Greek Fire, thanks again. All right, and our second one comes from Game Critic Kiki. And she writes, a great podcast to add to my recovery program. I found this podcast while searching for anything recovery related. I'm in my car most of the day for work, and I love listening to different podcasts that help me with my program. I love the variety of stories on this podcast and work hard at identifying with the people being interviewed. Thank you, O, for taking on this incredible project and for the service that you are providing for those who are struggling. My pleasure, Kiki, and thank you for that wonderful review. Kiki, like so many others who spend so much time in their cars that have either a tough time getting to meetings or long commutes to work, this recovery podcast revolution is helping so many. So messages like this really keep me focused and on the beam. So again, thank you, Kiki. And then finally, we have Brandon Clay. Here's another one for Raquel. And he writes, so helpful. Love hearing Raquel's story. Wow. Starting alcohol at age 9 is tough. Makes sense why things might not have worked out for so long. Keep up the great work and bringing out these great stories, Omar. Thank you so much, Brandon. Raquel's story was absolutely one of my favorites. I had the opportunity to watch Raquel go through her journey. She's happily married. She works a stellar program. She's a beacon of hope for all the newcomer women that come into the rooms. So thanks again, Raquel, for all your service. And if you haven't heard Raquel's story, it's episode number 5, Raquel G., the Runaway Model. And listeners, thank you so much for these wonderful reviews. They just keep coming and they just keep getting better. And now finally, the Share Podcast Private Accountability Group. Holy moly. It is now up to 772 members. It's growing daily. The interaction is stellar. There are so many people in there doing service and helping out. And not for nothing, you guys are helping me out a ton. I created the Share Podcast Private Accountability Group as a way to inform people of the upcoming episodes and of any upcoming recovery-related news. But what it has become is this amazing recovery resource for anyone that is suffering with any form of addiction. Gambling, sex, drugs, alcohol, food, whatever addictive tendencies you have going on in your life today can be addressed within the group. And it's just become this beautiful, safe space for people to discuss recovery and how to find recovery. So if you haven't joined the Facebook Private Accountability Group, go to Facebook, go to the search bar, type in SHAIR Private Group, and it will pop right up. Join in, post about whatever's going on in your life, good, bad, indifferent, whatever. What you'll find once you're in there is that people are having fun in recovery. So if you want to reach out to me about the Private Accountability Group, the Seattle Convention, Manuel Antonio, or anything else, just shoot me an email at o@thesharepodcast.com and I'll hook you right up. In the meantime, let's dive into Rose's story, but first, a quick message from our sponsor. Sober Nation is the largest online recovery community and treatment resource center. They provide treatment resources to those struggling with addiction, as well as to the family members who are caught in the crossfire. On top of that, Sober Nation is a huge community of good people who share their experience with each other. They have informative content, recovery and addiction news, as well as an entire clothing line which helps expand the culture of recovery. They can easily be found at www.sobernation.com. Sober Nation is putting recovery on the map. And finally, would you like to receive the most popular AA daily devotions free in one distribution? Transitions Daily delivers daily devotions from the 24 hours a day, AA Thought for the Day, Daily Reflections, Big Book Quote, Just for Today, As Bill Sees It, plus more. You can get our distribution daily via email, private Facebook group, or Twitter. Go to dailyaaemails.com for more information. And don't forget to share dailyaaemails.com with friends in meetings and with sponsees in recovery. Now back to the show. Hey, Rose, thanks for joining us.
Hey, glad to be here tonight.
Excellent. How are you feeling this evening?
It's a good Wednesday evening.
All right. Excellent. All right. So let's get started. Okay, folks, today we have Rose McKinney, the Midwestern mama, joining us on the Share podcast. So, Rose, let's dive right in. Tell us a little bit about how your life is today, your hobbies, exercise. Take us into your normal daily routine.
Life is good today, and I contrast that to 18 months ago when we were in the depths of my son's addiction. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Daily routine, it's a full routine, like I'm sure many of your listeners. Wife, parent, business owner, adjunct professor at a local university. So things are pretty busy. And on top of it, I am a passionate advocate for parents who are facing addiction with their children.
Do you have a routine that you follow weekly, meetings, stuff like that?
I would say now it's a little less of a recovery routine because it's more of a routine of living in recovery versus pursuing recovery, if that makes sense. But that routine still involves focusing every day on gratitude, taking inventory of how things are going, putting things in perspective. And again, very grateful that today being able to look at family life as a time of extreme gratitude because we're seeing our son thrive in his recovery.
Good. Well, listeners, just so you know, Rose is the mother of a drug addict. She is not actually a drug addict. So we're going to be coming from the perspective of the parent. So we're going to talk about what she's had to do in her life in her own recovery to deal with her own son's addiction. So this is going to be a perspective that has been requested from me on a few emails to get the perspective of a parent and what they've done to take care of themselves as well as take care of the family member. So as we dive into that, and you mentioned a little bit about living in gratitude, let's talk about how you maintain a spiritual condition on a daily basis, that conscious contact with your higher power.
Well, it really does start, I think, every morning when I wake up, and that's just simply taking stock of the fact that I've woken up and that I know, to the extent that anybody can know what's going to happen today. It doesn't mean I know everything, but I have a better sense today than a few years ago, and that means I know that most things are going to have their ups and downs and that I can weather them. And then I find that throughout the day, I'm taking time to pause, to breathe, to reflect, and to share a message of experience and hope for others.
Okay. And do you have is it a God concept, a higher power concept?
Thinking back on it, it was probably around 2011 when I had started going to Al-Anon meetings that I figured if ever there was a time to embrace a higher power and to explore spirituality, this was the time to do it. Things were out of control, and that first step really spoke to me. Life had become unmanageable.
Yes, I can only imagine. So normally this is where I ask, when was the first time you drank or used drugs? But since you're not the addict here, we're going to jump right into your story. And let's just start from where your life started to take a turn for the worst when you discovered that your son was having the beginning stages of his addiction and when it started to become unmanageable. So let's hear the story of, basically how it all began.
All right. Well, I'll jump back to where it first began, 1992. I never thought that we would face addiction. We had the baby that everybody wanted to have, happy, healthy, great childhood. And fast forward into high school, things started off on a really good footing. He was popular, smart, off the charts smart with test scores. He was playing sports. He was a captain of one of the teams. Kids came over to our house. We were the house in the neighborhood. So things were going really well. And it was his junior year of high school that we started to notice some things changing in his personality and behavior. And these are the things that I always tell parents to pay attention to. He was no longer interested in a lot of family activities. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you chalk that up to they're teenagers. They're asserting themselves. They're becoming independent. He was sleeping a lot. He was breaking rules, and he had never been a rule breaker. He was skipping classes, just things that were really out of character for our kid. And so we did start to ask what was going on, have serious conversations with him, talk to teachers. And everybody kind of said, oh, he's a good kid. It's tough being a kid these days. He'll probably be fine. It didn't sit well with us. We just knew it was something more, and we didn't know if it was in the mental health range or if it could be drugs. And so we spent probably a good year just wondering and keeping our eyes open and getting very confused and concerned. And it wasn't until senior year of high school that things had really gotten out of control. And again, at this point, we'd even been looking for drugs. And I don't know that we knew what we were looking for. We looked online at the resources that would say, oh, this is what you might see if your kid is using. And we didn't find anything. So it became a little bit of this struggle between what we thought. And this is really where I started to struggle myself. I didn't want to label my kid or condemn him to something that he wasn't really doing. And he was so convincing and really good at telling us, no, not happening.
Oh.
You're crazy.
Yeah.
But senior year, spring prom, he had taken my car to prom with our permission and left his car at home. And that night we were just so fed up with him that the next morning we opened the car and there was garbage all over the car, McDonald's bags and dirty gym bag. And, it was just bad, and started picking through it. And that's where we first discovered, marijuana and paraphernalia. So here's what we did. We laid it out on the kitchen counter, and when he got home, there it was. And we sat right down. And, pretty typical. Oh, it's only happened a handful of times. Reality, as we would later learn, it only happened a handful of times that day.
Right.
So things got pretty crazy. At this point, our straight A student with 34s on his ACTs was actually at risk of not graduating because he had skipped enough classes and not turned in enough homework. So we got him through graduation. He had a college scholarship. We were very hopeful that he was going to go to college and just kind of, sink or swim, move on. And then we started finding little strips of tinfoil in the car, and we didn't know what these were.
Yeah.
Took them to the local police department. They said, oh, it could be a couple of different things, most likely heroin. We're like, oh my gosh, This is like not what we're expecting. And this was really before the news media stories of suburban kids and suburban people in general having a heroin addiction. So you can imagine just kind of the turmoil of, okay, trying to see counselors, talking to family doctors, trying to work through the normal routes. And it just kept getting more and more frustrating. Well, ultimately, he postponed going to college until a semester later, went up to college, and within the first week, he was found passed out in the snow, sub-zero temperatures, ambulanced to ER, sent to detox, and everything just spiraled from there. And that's when we sat down and had that really crucial conversation that, look, whatever you say is going on, it's not the full picture, and this is a problem, and do you think substances are helping your problem, not helping your problem? And so the lines of communication started to open up, and then they closed down again. And that became the pattern for what would have been his college years. He would go to a program, maybe to get us off his back, or maybe because he really felt like he should, and then he couldn't embrace it. So he would stop, and then he would relapse. And this went over and over and over again until about 18 months ago.
And so, real quick, what was the timeline between when you first started discovering evidence of like pot and that kind of thing to where all of a sudden he is now into some heavy I'm assuming that now you've discovered that he's doing heroin. Is he doing Oxycontin?
Yes.
Okay, so now he's doing prescription drugs. He's doing Oxycontin, which is probably the worst of the worst. And so what was that timeline?
It was relatively quick. And even today, I'm not entirely sure of the specific dates. But as I said, it was still in high school that senior year that we were finding the foil strips with black marks on them, burn marks.
Yeah.
So he was doing it, or someone with him was doing it. So that timeline was fairly quick. My understanding is it was a pretty quick trip from first using marijuana to moving into the opiates, and that it just caught him really quickly.
How old is he now?
He's 23.
Oh, wow. So yeah, very quick. It moved very quickly. We're talking about 5 years.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So tell us about emotionally what those 5 years were like for you.
It was the proverbial roller coaster. And I'll go back to step one. Life became unmanageable. In some ways, I pride myself that life didn't become super unmanageable because we always had a great support network, and my husband and I have a good relationship. But boy, it sure felt like it was just getting ready to rip apart. You have that gamut of, am I going to get the phone call that no one wants to get?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is this going to be the overdose that resulted in death? Is he going to get in some kind of legal trouble? Will his actions harm somebody else if he's driving? All these things. So a lot of fear and concern and worry and just simply being scared. And then, a deep feeling of sadness, grief for the person that was no longer with us.
Right.
I remember when he had left home and he was sofa surfing, which was very, very sad in and of itself, sitting in his bedroom, and I would do that morning and evening, and I would meditate. And for some reason, I felt like meditating in his bedroom gave me a connection to try to accept and to sort through and to find some peace or serenity with what was happening. But sometimes I would just cry.
Yeah.
Because here was his bedroom of the kid that had, by all appearances, had everything. And I don't mean in a spoiled way, but had friends and good grades and sports and family and, just sort of all the things that are supposed to prevent this situation.
And were you going to therapy as well as Al-Anon?
I did. I started right after he had the incident at college, and he had been kicked out of the dorms for using in the dorms. I knew that I needed to do something for me. So I went online, psychologytoday.com, and you can plug in your geographic location, your concerns, your needs, whatever, and it'll shoot you back a whole list of people that might be able to address that. So I talked to a couple, made an appointment, and boy, it was, the Buddha saying about the teacher appears when the student is ready.
Yes.
The person that I found was exactly the right person at the right time. And it was a combination of kind of guiding me to explore what I was feeling and thinking, but also somebody that had clinical experience in working through addiction that could define things for me from that perspective as well, and say, well, this is what this means, and here's what typically might happen, or here's what you can expect. So it was a nice balance, and that was really a turning point for me. I'll segue for a second, and listeners may find this really interesting, that it was summer of 2011, and things were busy at work, things were busy at home. We have a younger kid and an older kid, so again, the responsibilities and needs were very split, and yet middle kid was getting the focus here because he needed it.
Yep.
But I blocked off Friday afternoons on my calendar, and I came home and I took a stack of reading material and a journal outside, and I would sit outside and I'd read a little bit, things like Buddha, the Talmud, the Four Agreements, Al-Anon literature, etc. And then I'd write a little bit, and then I'd just sit. And it was a sacred time. I call it Serenity Summer. But so many of those aha moments came to me.
Go ahead.
By just being, I was able to sort things through.
So you would block out that time, those Fridays, to do your research, your due diligence, to find out as much as you possibly could about what you were facing, correct?
Not even so much the due diligence and the research about what I was facing, but to wrap my arms around it and find some measure of energy to deal with it, some measure of comfort with the unknown, some measure of peace with the idea that I could move on with my life and still do the things that were important to me, and yet at the same time rally around the kid that needed me, even though he didn't want me, but I knew he needed me.
I love this. I love where you're going with this, because more than trying to figure out how to help him, you were helping yourself. You were like going to the gym and working out, trying to build these muscles so you could mentally, spiritually, emotionally cope with everything that was coming your way.
Absolutely. Deep down, I knew that this was going to be a long journey, and I didn't know how long. And, you know, it's a long journey, whether it's a journey of a day or a journey of 1,000 years. It's still a long journey when you're talking about a loved one's substance use disorder. So I really, why this came to me, was it a therapist that pointed me in that direction? Was it my higher power putting an idea in my head? Whatever it was, I just knew that if I didn't prioritize that, I wasn't going to be the person that I needed to be and the person that others in my family counted on.
So I want to dive in a little bit into that, because I want to give some suggestions here. Let's say, for example, there's a parent listening right now, and for the first time, they're just discovering what you were discovering for the first time. This is just where they start to suspect that things are going wrong with their child, and they're suspecting that it is now because of drug and alcohol abuse. And so what are the suggestions you would give to them? You had to learn some things first before you got to this point where you dedicated this time to prepare yourself and to strengthen your resolve. What are the suggestions you would give to these parents right from the beginning?
First and foremost, I call it mom radar, but trust your gut.
Yes.
And seek out information and seek out support. And that information can, be going online and familiarizing yourself with addiction and drugs and alcohol. It can be, meeting with a treatment professional and just learning from them, and reach out for support. Again, whether that's through a therapist for yourself, whether that's engaging in something like Al-Anon, or another thing that I did and I found very helpful, and what has prompted our young addicts from becoming a community, is I went online, and it was something I had never done before. I had never participated in any sort of online chat or forum or blog. And I found a group, it doesn't exist anymore, that was for parents of young addicts. And I found it enormously helpful to put my questions out there and respond to other people's questions. Not because we had the answers, but because we were all going through it and we could share something. When that group disbanded, a handful of us decided to stay in touch and exchange names and emails. And from that, I had started writing for some different publications and talking about what had been going on, because I felt like there was a real need for real-time information. Everybody loves the happy story of recovery. And sadly, people also like the tragic stories, because, oh my goodness, nobody wants to tell the story, though, when you're stuck in the muck.
Yeah.
And that was the story that I wanted to tell. So anyway, going back to your question, get informed, gain knowledge and gain support. Because between the two, you've got really good tools to be able to weather whatever comes your way.
Absolutely. Now, here's another thing too, because there is a level of denial when you're an addict. But I think, as a parent, your initial inclination is to be in denial about what's going on with your child, and you possibly don't want to embrace the full scope of what's happening, because just the thought of your child, your baby, participating and going through some of these things and using drugs, or the extent of what those drugs could be. Because at first, many of us are like, yeah, my kid drinks, he smokes pot, that's part of growing up. But when you start crossing the line into heroin and Oxycontin, now all of a sudden it's a game changer. So when we're discussing, that kind of mindset, and you went to go see, when you finally made that decision to go see the therapist, right?
Yes.
What was that first meeting like?
Ironically, it happened when we were just approaching that first turning point. Our kid had just gotten notice that he could no longer be in the dorms. Everything was unraveling, and we knew just by timing we were going to see him the next day to try to sort things out. So the first meeting really ended up being a little bit more of a triage meeting versus a focus on me meeting.
Okay.
And that was okay. Again, it was what I needed at the time, was to have somebody to talk through a potential game plan. But in the subsequent meetings with the therapist, it became an opportunity to focus in on how I was dealing with it, how other members of the family were dealing with it. And interestingly, I think they sort of lived through it vicariously, in that, they'd say, what'd you talk about today? And I didn't have any problem talking about it. And what are you going to do? And so, I felt like I then became sort of the missionary for the therapist, and would say, I'd use the motivational interviewing and ask them the questions. So somehow I was carrying it forward. Okay.
So then I guess there wasn't any resistance to the information that was being presented to you.
Overall, no. I mean, every once in a while something wouldn't sit well with me, and maybe you'd call that denial or resistance or whatnot. But usually then I would take that back and either do a little bit more research, meditate on it, give it consideration. If it turned out not to be the case, lucky. If it turned out that, wow, that is what's going on, I think I had that sense of resiliency.
Okay. All right. And meanwhile, how many brothers and sisters does he have? Is it just two brothers?
An older sister and a younger brother.
Okay. So he's got an older sister, younger brother, and neither of them is an addict?
No.
Okay. And so this is a 5-year issue that was happening. What was going on in the family as far as the other two kids and your husband?
Yeah. And this is an important, again, for your listeners. The impact on siblings is huge. For our older child, it put her in a very awkward position. You want to protect your brother. You're close in age, just, a few years apart. You're just becoming an adult yourself. So, when you look at them versus us, adults versus kids, parents versus children, you're not quite sure where you should land. I think for our daughter, it was definitely a struggle. As this period continued, then it actually opened up our relationship between mom, dad, and daughter, because all of a sudden we were having a very adult exchange with her. And so that was, a really neat transformation, albeit brought on by her brother's addiction. For younger brother, oh my gosh, can you imagine being in 5th grade and not knowing where your brother is, and being old enough to know what drugs are and how scary they are?
Yes.
He grew up very quickly. He could certainly see the struggles. He was a mature, cooperative participant, but very scary. He himself found some really great support in the school with a counselor that had family experience with addiction. with her own sibling that had been through this. And so I think he learned the value of having someone to talk to and to deal with uncomfortable feelings.
Right. No. And so I guess what I'm trying to get to too as well is, did they seek therapy? Did they go to the Al-Anon meetings with you, or did they lean on you to kind of go and, I guess, get the information and then bring it back home?
I was more of the messenger. My daughter pursued her own path of discovery for many reasons and had already been on sort of a path of discovery of yoga and meditation and that sort of thing. You know, she pursued her path, and then our youngest, you know, more just through open conversations and having school support, was able to find his peace. I think the hardest thing for a younger kid was every time we thought that maybe this was the day that our son was going to embrace treatment and recovery, you know, it would quickly come to a crash. And so as a little kid, it's almost like having your myth busted every time. You know, you're so hopeful, and then, oh, it didn't work. Oh, you're so hopeful, and then, oh, it didn't work. So, you know, we really tried to help him maintain faith that one day his brother would be ready and that we love him no matter what. And we really encouraged them to continue a relationship. So when his brother would come home from time to time, or we kept very good communication with my son during his addiction to the extent that he would respond, but mostly kept communication. You know, we really encouraged the boys to just be brothers. And if his big brother came home, you know, fine, go off and play video games together. This is not the time to try to hash things out and have a debate. And I think that now, watching the boys and his sister together, the sibling relationships are so strong, and that probably warms my heart, is that they have been through something together.
Oh, there's no question about it. Now, let's talk about those last, prior to him going into that last, let's go back to 18 months ago when he decided that enough was enough and he was going to actually seek recovery. What was it like as far as where was he getting the money for the drugs? And was he coming to you for money? And what kind of things were you doing to start to push him in the direction of recovery without enabling him?
Oh, yes, that balance between empowering versus enabling, very difficult. And we certainly were not always clear on which was which. To his credit, he was almost always employed most of his years with addiction. He didn't always keep jobs, but he generally had some means. He did steal. That was unfortunate, from us, from his little brother. So those were some sad times. When he finally realized that things weren't going well, and I think he always knew they weren't going well, but when he was finally ready to do something about it, he pursued things on his own through the county and was able to qualify for help in that way based on his own situation. And he did then go to treatment. He did, it was about 45 days of residential treatment, got out, went to a halfway program, unfortunately relapsed right away because he still had that idea that, you know, I could probably still smoke pot once in a while. Mm-hmm. And one thing led to another, and it didn't work. So things got really desperate. And at that point, we did stage an intervention as a family, a formal intervention. People wrote their letters. We were very worried. I mean, we were at the point where he didn't look good. He was, you know, even the places where he used to stay on sofas, they weren't so keen on having him anymore. You know, burning lots of relationships, you know, couldn't hold jobs because he didn't have any place to live. You know, so he got in that chicken and the egg of, well, I've got a job, but I don't have any place to live, so I can't show up shaven. Therefore, you know, damn, life sucks. So, you know, go get high. So it just kind of became this bad cycle again. And he showed up one night at home, and we were out, but got home fairly quickly thereafter. And it's not that we hadn't had that conversation with him before, but we just said, you know what, tomorrow morning something has to change. Tonight, go to sleep, get a shower, eat something, tomorrow morning the sun comes up and it's a new day and you need to have a plan. So sure enough, he got up that morning and he says, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I said, you need to figure that out. And he went through kind of his list of criteria because he had it in his mind what wouldn't work for him. And this kind of crosses over into that enabling, but I had done enough research on options, and I finally just handed him a piece of paper and I said, here are 3 places that meet your criteria. Call them today. So end of the day, at the last minute, he called, and one of them said, could you get a ride here tomorrow? And he said, yeah, I could probably get a ride. And I'm nodding my head, yes, you can get a ride there right now even. So that next day, drove there. Ironically, it's a place that's not far from our home, literally in the same suburb. And he went in and he was as clear as could be. I don't want to keep doing what I'm doing. I know that I want outpatient because I want to be able to work because it'll make me feel more productive, and he just kind of, he did it. So I asked him shortly thereafter, after he had been in the program about 12 weeks and was about to graduate from their intensive outpatient program, I said, what was it about this program? And he said, oh, well, it's a good program and they treat me with respect and I like the people. And he said, but really it was the first time that I wanted to make changes, not just because somebody else thought I needed to, but because I don't want to go back living like I was living. In reality, I think watching a lot of his childhood friends graduate from college and get on with their lives and get their big boy jobs and big girl jobs, and here he was not doing that, It was an eye-opener.
There's no question about it. And it really sounds, the way that you describe it, and it's only been 18 months, but the way that you describe it, you handled it so well under the circumstances. And I think that that's the message that needs to be portrayed here, that A, that it's possible, and that B, that it's not as complicated. It's difficult, but it's not as complicated as many of us want to make it out to be. And I think that also your ability to have limits and boundaries, because it sounds as though even though you were helping him out, you had already set some limits and boundaries, probably with the therapist, I'm assuming.
Maybe even a little bit before that, but we did. We stood firm early on, even upon finding the drug use, and we said drugs aren't welcome in our home.
Perfect.
And that's a choice that you have to make. And at the time, he would portray it as we kicked him out. Reality, we didn't kick him out. We said drugs aren't welcome in our home. And we had 2 other things that he really found hard to live with at the time, which is pretty funny. One was if he was going to live in our home, so there couldn't be drugs and there couldn't be paraphernalia, he needed to keep family hours because we had to get up and go to work and we had another kid to go to school. And so family hours meant, you're not coming and going at all hours of the night whenever you feel like it. Mm-hmm. And the third one was if you're not going to come home, because, he was over 18, if you're not going to come home, then you need to, out of courtesy, let us know before we go to bed. Because when I wake up in the night, I don't want to wonder where you are and if I should be worried. And so those 3 simple things were our boundaries. And again, it's not that he wasn't welcome at home, but his addiction behavior was not welcome at home.
Now, here's a tough question because here's something that I've had to deal with as a sponsor. As a sponsor, I have had parents that come up to me and mention their son, who I already knew because he was going to the meetings and he was, struggling very badly. I had sponsored him for a while. So I remember one of the parents came to me while the meeting was going on and he asked me to come outside and he said, listen, he's back out using again and we don't know what to do. And we need some help. I come from a very tough love environment. So I guess I'm wondering what you were prepared to do. But I told him, I said, listen, if he doesn't want to get sober, if he doesn't want to get clean, because he was another one that was using, I think he was smoking crack. I said, if he doesn't want this, he knows what's available to him. He's been to meetings. I've sponsored him. We've had discussions. He knows his options. He lives at home. He has a car. He has access to money. I think you guys spoil him a little too much. And if you're wondering what you should do, you need to tell him exactly what you did. If you're going to be doing drugs, you're not doing them in this house, and you're going to have to figure it out and apply a little tough love. That's kind of the school of thought that I come from. Is that what you were prepared to do, or do you have a different message?
Yes and no. We were not prepared to cut him off 100%. In fact, we really did cut him off 99% early on, which in some regards meant that later we didn't have any leverage anymore. I mean, the only thing that we were providing to him was his phone. And we weren't willing to stop that because it was our line of communication. I could text him a message and say, hey, was thinking about you, hope you're having a good day. His dad, my husband could text him a message and say, hey, buddy, you want to go to lunch today? I'd love to talk, ready to help you when you're ready. And if it weren't for us keeping him connected with a phone, I think we would have lost a lot of the foundation that has been part of his recovery now. Now, sometimes he would get pissed off when we would get in touch with him. Sometimes he would lose his phone, and we wouldn't hear from him for days, which would scare the what out of us.
Of course.
But that was the only thing we were providing. When he would come home or, contact us and ask if he could come home and shower or something like that, we always said yes. I wanted him to be able to come home and see, A, that life was going on without him, and that, B, his home was still here.
Right.
Let me talk for a minute on tough love, because I have an interesting story. So let's go back to that intervention. It was 20 months ago, so a couple months before he actually decided to get help. He said, thank you, but not today. I know that I need to do something, but it's not going to happen today. And of course, the professionals, and I'm going to lump them all together, but the professionals at that point, said, you have to have that, okay, then we're not doing this anymore. He was so fragile and wounded and broken, and we were so worried about his well-being at that point. We did the opposite. Oh, it sounds counterintuitive, but we started reaching out to him and saying, why don't you come home and spend the night? Why don't you, have some food with us? Why don't you just come hang out? Here, let me do some laundry. Things like that. We really felt like if we weren't giving him adequate nutrition and giving him a safe, clean place to be from time to time, that he was never going to come to make a positive decision.
Right.
And so I think we needed to nourish him. Now, earlier on in this, that might not have been the right thing to do. And in fact, I think, he kept hitting some of those bottoms and then he would bob back up again. But there was just something that my husband and I both recognized that said, now is the time to really just try to warm his soul. And I remember he'd come home and he'd fall asleep on the floor and I'd just cover him with a blanket and, just kind of say a little prayer. And I think some people would say, oh, you're not doing the right thing. But truly, when we did that, it only took a short period of time before he was ready.
I don't think that you did anything wrong, and I don't think that there's any right or wrong way to deal with a situation like this, except for for the blatant enabling. First of all, I love what you did because it's not enabling, okay? It wasn't like, here's some money, all right? Yeah, no, you can come and go as you please. I just want to know that you're safe. So, I'd rather you smoke crack in the house. I'd rather you bang dope in the house. No, I think that, and I'm sure you've watched some of the intervention episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, when I see that, it's horrific. If you can videotape somebody smoking crack in the house, then to me, that is that's enabling a person. Okay. Yes. Where if, I don't know what to do, they're going to get mad at me if I don't give them the crack. Right. And I watch it and it's disgusting to say the least. You were just loving. You just showed him that you loved him. His father showed him that he still loved him. He was still welcome. And this is what your life could be like. let me give you another snapshot of what life is like at home. But don't bring drugs in the house. You're not going to be able to come and go as you please. If you come back and you're still using drugs, we're definitely not going to support your habits. And I think as far as the phone is concerned, that's a smart move. For him to be able to reach out to you and for you to be able to reach out to him, to keep that lifeline open. I truly believe this is a good message for any parent that is out there listening. I think you can go overboard on the tough love.
Agree.
I think that if you're like, you know what, you make your choice. If you're going to be using out there, we want nothing to do with you until you figure it out. I think maybe for some parents, they can do that. And he was out there. He made the choice to leave. And you would just say, hey, please come home. And he'd come home. And so I think the yin and yang that happened there over the course of those 2 months, it made all the difference in the world.
And I think it really did lay a foundation for his recovery, because when he was ready, and I'll go back to that Buddhist saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. It's so hard for parents because we see the problem, or once we see the problem, and then we know the solution, but we can't control them. We can't make them do it or make it stick. So it's really tough as parents to know that when the time is right, they will do it, that treatment is possible, recovery is possible. And so that's why I come back to, you have to keep your own faith. You have to work on yourself, even when that seems like you should be putting all your effort into your kid. No, you have a life, you have a purpose long before your kid started using. And so you have to stay true to that.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I want to start winding down. I think we've got a really good idea of what it is to be the parent of a child that's using, and, a lot of really good advice and suggestions on, just what to do. So let me just ask you some closing questions just so we can really kind of nail down some really good suggestions for our moms and dads out there. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So first of all, when did you first decide that it was time for you to start? I guess at what stage were you at when you decided, I need to do something about myself? I need to do something to help myself here before I can start helping my son.
We were a good year to 2 years in. And I think at this point, we had sort of exhausted our common sense and we needed help ourselves. So it was a couple years in. Interesting, right along that same time, I had seen a news release, and I think it was from Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. But anyway, I had seen a news release with some current statistics about youth substance use. And without really thinking about it, I whipped off 2 emails. I whipped off an email to a recovery publication, and I whipped off an email to one of our local newspapers. And I said, first and foremost, where's the report on this? And secondly, when you report it, you need the parent's perspective. I heard back from both publications ASAP asking me if I would write that. And that wasn't why I had sent the note to begin with. So the writing piece began about that same time. And I have to say, writing was a great way to grapple with concerns and try out ideas and begin to articulate my feelings. So that writing piece was early on in this process. And to this day, I think writing, and I encourage parents to write, is very, very helpful.
Now, was this published in an online magazine?
It was a print publication with an online presence, and then the newspaper was both print and digital.
Do you continue to do that in a public way?
I do still write some magazine articles from time to time. I don't do the newspaper column anymore, but then that's when I started Our Young Addicts and started the blog and Twitter and an online presence.
Okay, so please, our parents want to know, what are those resources?
All right. OurYoungAddicts.com. When you get there, there's a blog. It's updated at least once a week, sometimes more often. We do guest blogs. I write blogs. It's still very much real time. Fortunately, we're not in the muck so much these days, but it's still very real time. I have resources on there for parents and professionals. When I find something good, I put it on there. How to talk to your kids about this, what to do if, numbers you can call, etc. So I try to share as much good information because it's a maze. And sometimes you don't find very good information. So when I find something good, I share it.
Can they reach out to you in there, Rose?
Yes, they can.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, folks, I'm going to go ahead and list that on the show notes. That website will be there. And is there any other resources you want to share with the listeners?
There are a lot of good resources. I encourage Twitter in particular and just throw in some keywords. But partnershipfordrugfree.org is a good one for parents. There are some of it's escaping me now, but it's not hard to Google and find good resources.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and I'll have these resources available on Rose's show notes. And also you had mentioned some books. You were reading a lot of books. Can you list the books that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yes, and they're not going to be the ordinary books that you might think of, although there are some good ones, and I'll suggest those in a second too. The Four Agreements, it's been around a long time, but it's a great way of dealing with life. There is another book called Simple Abundance, which is all about gratitude. I read a lot of things, Buddha. Those were probably the three things that gave me the most insight and comfort. Today, there are a couple of books out there. Some of the David Sheff books are really good about understanding addiction from a family and a parent perspective. There is a book out right now, I think it's called The 20-Minute Guide, and it's the craft approach, which is all for families trying to help loved ones to get help for addiction. Those are really good.
Okay. And so, let's see, I know that the Four Agreements is Don Miguel Ruiz.
See.
Then the other one, the one following that, do you have the author for those?
Yes. Simple Abundance, the author is Sarah Von Brethnock.
Okay.
Something along those lines.
Okay, so those are the two that you gave. And then the other ones were?
Oh, just any writings about Buddha, about meditation.
Got it. Perfect. So let me ask you this. What are the best suggestions that you received on your journey?
Well, the good old take it one day at a time. And sometimes it was a minute at a time or a second at a time. The learning to let go, which is not easy, and understanding what that meant. Reciting the Serenity Prayer, and again, really thinking about what each part of that meant and how to live that. But in all honesty, I think the best advice that people gave me is, when he's ready, he'll be ready. And they were right, and believing that it was possible, believe in the possibility that things will turn around, that things will be better.
Beautiful. And finally, for all the parents that are listening out there, what would you suggest to them?
First and foremost, take action. But before you take action, do your homework, get smart, go into it with a cool, calm head, because action that is in the moment and that's heated, it will backfire. But don't wait. Do act. Go to somebody, ask for help, confront your suspicions, all those things, because generally it only gets worse, and you want to hit it as early as possible and be as proactive as possible. And then that support piece. You are not alone. Everyone knows someone that has been through this if they themselves have not been. And I didn't get the stigma that you hear about. I heard people that genuinely said, how can I help? Or I don't know what to do, but I'm so sorry. And so I found that opening up really connected me with people. And boy, through that sense of connection, the friends and relationships that I've made over the past, 5 or 6 years, I think I've made more real connections during this time than I made my whole life living up to this time.
It's 100% true. I can totally relate. It's no different than the camaraderie and the bonds and the friendships that form when we come into recovery, because we relate to each other. We're going through the exact same struggles. We're battling with addiction. We're battling with withdrawals. We're battling to just grab on for dear life, because we've ruined so much of our life and we've ruined so much of the people around us, that when we start sharing openly about what's going on with us and the wreckage we've caused, right away someone else will follow up and say, I've been there too. I've done that too. Here's what I've done. And so it's no different. That camaraderie, those bonds that you form with the other parents, with the therapists, within the groups, it grows exponentially. And it's so real, because it's not this superficial conversations about, blah, 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 whatever. There's all these.
It's not, hi, how are you? Great, great. Okay, good.
Yes.
It's not that.
No. Once you connect with someone and you share an intimate moment, in some cases, it bonds you right away for life with that other person. You just feel that instant connection and that instant bond. And I think that's what the strongest message that we need to give the listeners is that the more connections and the more relationships you can establish in this time that you're going through, the easier it's going to be for you to get through it.
100% yes. So knowledge and support.
It's 100% necessary. And, what's beautiful is that I don't really think that there's any stigma, at least not on my end, on the Al-Anon side or on the family side. I think if anything, it's going to be of compassion. It's going to be of, it's one thing to say, I'm a drug addict. It's another thing to say that I am the parent of a drug addict. And I think the compassion is much stronger on your end.
But there's the fear of judgment. Like, you don't want to be that parent, or what kind of parent are you? Where did you go wrong in your parenting? Or don't you watch your kid? Or, don't you have whatever it is? There is that kind of stigma on the parent side. Again, I didn't really face it, but I hear about it.
Right. That does make sense. It does make sense that,
you don't want to go to your boss and say, well, guess what's happening at my house?
Oh.
Here's how come I'm not really doing my job today, because we were up all night.
Yes.
And so again, yes, there's compassion, but sometimes people kind of roll their eyes like, ooh, or even having, the younger sibling, ooh, is it safe for them to go to your house? Because you're the house with the kid that, it's like, oh my. Yeah, it's fine. I now tell parents for our younger kid, when I meet them for the first time, or if they're, wondering what, we had kids over here for New Year's Eve, and I said, I want you to know we've been through things. And so I've really got an eye out.
I'll tell you one thing is for sure. My daughter won't be able to get anything over on me.
No. No, I feel bad for the younger one. Man, oh man, are we hip to what might happen? I don't think it's going to be a problem, but man, are we savvy now.
Well, I guess the best part of all of it is that for them, it hasn't been a source of rebelliousness. It's been more of definitely bringing you much closer together as a family.
Yes, truth in that.
Beautiful. All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Rose, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and, giving us all this information. We certainly do need it.
You are welcome, and I will share the podcast as well. So send me whatever I need to be able to share that even wider.
Don't worry. I'm going to give you everything that you need. So we have now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Buenas noches.
Thank you for joining us on the Share Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview, or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.thesharepodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss 12